John Williams on behalf of the Milton Historical Society to invite you to part 2 of our 3rd annual lecture series this afternoon. Before we get into our special guest speaker today, a couple of quick announcements, administrative kind of things, if you will. First, to let you know that the Milton Historical Society has a new website that you can access at MiltonPAHistoricalSociety.com, and on there you can view all these lectures if you like that we've done so far, and I believe they will at some point soon on DVD, or you can access them through YouTube. And of course, we always encourage you, if you have a particular interest in what you're doing, these lectures or other local related history activities, to consider a membership in the Milton Historical Society. These lectures here in January, February, and March are part of our lecture series, but we also have an annual banquet in April, which we consider our kind of anchor event, if you will, where we have another guest speaker, and the topic will be Prohibition in Pennsylvania when he shows up there in April, and I will share more specific details with you on that next month at our 3rd and final lecture part of this. And I think you'll find him interesting as well. The banquet is open to the public, and you'll be able to buy tickets here, and again, have more information for you. March 15th is the next one, I believe. And once again, we want to gratefully acknowledge Chuck Everett for his continued generous support of these lectures, helping us to make all this possible. Before I get into introducing and talking to you a little bit about Betsy Ross, just wondering if you could help us out with some quick marketing questions for us. For example, how many of you spotted our ad for this in the Milton Standard Journal? Okay, very good. All right. How many of you saw our ad for this in the Sunbury Daily Item? All right. Okay. And how about the bookmarks that are just ready? Okay, wonderful. That helps us. Absolutely. Okay. As I mentioned before, our objectives for these speakers are to present something perhaps at least somewhat original, some high-quality presentations for you that will inform, enlighten, and yes, even entertain. And our guest today checks all those boxes easily. Again, I think you'll be pleased with what you're going to hear and see. I should also remind you, before we get started with Betsy, that when she concludes her conversation with us, we will have an opportunity to hear from her alter ego, who will give us some insight in what it's like to bring an historical figure to life. And this is a new experience for me, introducing a historical figure a couple centuries away. But what fun it is at the same time. You should know that the person behind or inside Betsy, whichever the case may be, is Joe Lawrence, who lives in Newark, Delaware. And yes, by the way, that is Newark. The accent is on the second syllable, and having lived there for 10 years, I can tell you that the people in Newark are very particular about that, and they do not want to be confused with that other sort of sounding like city in somewhere in New Jersey. Okay? Jill earned her Bachelor of Fine Arts degree in musical theater and graduated with honors from the University of the Arts in Philadelphia. She has performed with the Ziggurat Theater in Los Angeles, the Pennsylvania Renaissance Fair, American Family Theaters, and the Philadelphia Shakespeare Festival, among other venues. For several years, she has welcomed visitors from all over the world as Betsy Ross at the Betsy Ross House in historic Philadelphia. She has also participated in American Historical Theater, touring all over the United States, doing children's theater as Pippi Longstocking. In between performances, Jill has been an adjunct professor at Camden County College in New Jersey. She has worked as a writer and tour guide for Once Upon a Nation, which is part of Historic Philadelphia Incorporated, that places storytellers at several historical sites throughout the city where, excuse me, people can hear the history about the site on demand. She also has been a guest storyteller at the National Archives in Washington, D.C., and the Pennsylvania Renaissance Fair, an Elizabethan event in Manheim, Pennsylvania, where she was the court jester. Currently, Jill is teaching acting classes at Gem Studios, a performing company for children in Newark, and also with child drama workshops in schools throughout Delaware. She will soon be starring as Eliza Hamilton for the American Historical Theater. She and her husband also perform as Christmas carolers for the fabulous Fezziwigs, a company that performs out of New York and Philadelphia. So this afternoon, we all have an opportunity to hear from Betsy herself. Thank you.
My program is Betsy Ross. I see we have a large audience. If you're having any trouble hearing me at all, just wave your arms wildly above your head, and I will endeavor to project some more. Madam, if you'd like to come down to the front, there is room. You might be able to hear me better. Also, I don't usually start these presentations out of character, but today is a very special day for me. I was a first-person interpreter as Betsy Ross for many years at the Betsy Ross House, but this is the debut of my hour-long presentation. You are the first audience to hear it, and I would like to dedicate this and every future performance to my father, who is right here.
Servant and chauffeur.
And I want to give him credit because when I told him, Daddy, I know I have straight A's, but I'm not going to be a lawyer or a doctor. I'm going to be an actress. He only ever said, go for it, honey. Love you, Pop. All right, now we shall get to a Betsy. Just give me a moment here. Let me concentrate. Gather my thoughts, call down the muse. So, I wish to thank you all so very much for that warm welcome. I confess that I do not understand how I find myself to be here in front of you today. As I recall quite specifically, my last clear memory was that I was on my deathbed. I was 4 and 80 years old, and I had gone quite stone blind. But now I find myself miraculously restored in front of all of you, and I do not understand it. And I seem to be in, what would you say, my middling years? Perhaps 40? Would you say 30? Perhaps 30, and my sight is well restored. I am most pleased. This is my good side. So, I do not understand how these things come to be, but if it does not trouble you, then I shall not let it trouble me either. I think, oh well, I must profess myself to be quite bewildered by the mythology and folklore that has sprung up about my life and work. I do not understand it at all. You see, I was never famous in my own lifetime for sewing flags or for any other reason, nor would I have sought such fame for myself. Well, think on it, my poppets. I was living in an occupied city during the Revolutionary War. I was making flags for the Patriot side. Why would I want anyone to know this? Making a flag for the rebel cause was an act of treason. Treason is not looked on kindly by the British Crown. So, I kept that very much to myself for quite some time. Also, I was raised Quaker, and we do not care to be honored with statues and applause, and no, it is not to be borne. It is not for me. I also find it so strange. Do you know, on the way here today, I saw a young man with an American flag emblazoned upon his jumper. How bizarre. Or I saw another young woman with one on her haversack. This is most peculiar to me. We do not use flags in this manner in the 1700s. We do not even make them into bunting to put along our windows. No, this is never done. Flags in the 1700s are never used for ornamentation or decoration, nor do we revere them with the almost cult-like adoration that I have seen rising up above the American flag today. No. Flags in my time are used merely for communication and identification purposes. To wit, who is that large group of men over there? Are they going to try and kill us? Oh, they're raising their colors. Oh, it's the Hessians. We'd better move along. But I shall speak more about flags and their uses and communiques alongside. I think if you are to clearly understand my world, and as I am looking about me, I see things have changed quite a bit in my time, since my time. So to truly understand where I come from and my origins, I shall have to take you back before the Revolution, nay, even further than that, all the way back to Europe, and I want to say about 1650. For this was when my great-grandfather, Andrew Griscom, was coming over from England. Or perhaps it was Wales. No, I had a cousin who was quite certain that he came from Scotland. Yes, that is it. The Griscoms are Scottish, and that is where we are from. Or Wales. The thing of it is, by the time I was a child, none of my sisters or aunts could agree exactly where great-grandfather Griscom had come from. But it was definitely Europe, yes, and he was definitely a carpenter. This is what we know for certain. At any rate, so our adventures in the colonies began when Andrew Griscom came from somewhere in Europe. He was born in the 1650s, just about the time King Charles I was losing his head. Most unfortunate for him. And of course, I'm sure some of you are history folk, and you know that Cromwell had taken over power and closed the theaters, and Christmas celebrations were prohibited, sporting events were canceled. It must have been a very merry time. At any rate, 'twas a time of great upheaval in the churches, and lots of people were breaking away from traditional churches and coming up with their own religions and their own sects, which of course upset everyone in the church greatly. But my great-grandfather was drawn to the particular teachings of a young man named George Fox. George Fox was a young Englishman who, taken about to wandering about the English countryside, contemplating God and our relationship and heaven and earth and all of these important spiritual matters. And what he came up with were the beliefs that God still speaks to us today, even as he did in biblical times, and that we have no need of priests or popes or clergy or bishops to intercede between us and the Almighty. Every person can have their own relationship with God if only they can be still enough and quiet enough to listen to that little spark of of the Lord within their own bosom. Now, it does not sound as though this is such a dramatic or radical faith, but I assure you, it had many folks quite on edge. It was not at all a popular idea. Also unpopular was Mr. Fox's belief that because each of us has the light of God within our breast, therefore are all men created equal. Yes, even men of different faiths, even people of different races and colors, even women. I know. I know. Shocking, radical, blasphemous. Naturally, the Quakers, well, they really did succeed in upsetting all of the people in charge. They seem to have a particular talent for it. Let me see. Yes. Mr. Fox once appeared before a magistrate. You see, the religion he founded was called the Religious Society of Friends, but it was given the name the Quakers when Mr. Fox stood before a magistrate and told him that he should tremble and quake before the word of the Lord. The judge was unimpressed and rather sarcastic, and he referred to Mr. Fox as a Quaker. And the name stuck. We rather like it. So you may refer to us as Quakers. It is not derogatory. We do not find it so. But our formal name is the Religious Society of Friends. Now the Friends have different customs, many of which offend other religions. We tend to speak in the biblical speech of thee and thou and thine, thee is, thou art, etc., etc., etc. You will notice that I do not use these affectations in my own speech, for though I was raised Quaker, I spent so many years married to an Anglican, I have quite dropped it from my speech, but as a child, I too spoke with the thee and the thine and the thou, etc., etc., etc. We are easy to spot. Our clothing, like our speech, is kept plain and modest. Jewelry, wigs, lace, feathers, and cosmetics, other adornments, all these are considered to be fripperies, distractions from the inner light of God, and therefore they are to be avoided. Now, we do not condemn those of you who indulge in such practices, and your earbobs are lovely, madam. We simply do not wear these things for ourselves. Every day when I was a little girl, I would wear the same plain gray dress and apron. White aprons were the fashion of the time, so some Quaker women chose to wear green aprons in order to be deliberately out of fashion. Look how unfashionable we are. Look how little attention we are paying to our clothing. At any rate, we do not celebrate Christmas or Easter as others do, considering all the days of the year that you should be good and kind and have godly thoughts all of the days of the year and not on just supposed holy days. So we have no celebrations or rivals or decorations of that sort. We do not meet in churches, but we meet in what you would call a meeting house. And when you come into a Quaker meeting house, perhaps what you will be struck by the most are the things that you do not see. You will see no steeple. You will see no bells. There will be no hymnals, no choir, no organ, no crucifixes, and no altar. Most assuredly, you will not see any clergy. We do not use them. The way we worship is we sit in silence. And we wait for the light of the Lord to inspire us to rise and speak. It is a very peaceful faith. Now, sometimes messages are sent to us from the Lord that have no meaning to us, but if we are failed to share them with the congregants, then perhaps it will have meaning for some of them. And everyone in the church is able to rise and speak, down from the smallest child to the most senior elder. All have the same rights. I should mention also another radical belief that Quakers have, and this is the one that I think irritates friends the most about the Quakers, is that because we believe that all human beings have the divine spark of God within them, no one can be more important than anyone else. Therefore, no one can own another person. We may not have slaves. No one can raise their hand in violence to another person. Therefore, are all Quakers pacifists? And I think this is what really enrages people about the Quakers, is that we refuse to fight. We also refuse to pay taxes to any government operation that funds violence or war in any way, and this causes much grief and outrage as well. Yes, we are a terrible, awful people, we pacifists. With our love and our acceptance, it's dreadful. Let me see, what else can I tell you about being a Quaker? I know there was something else I wanted to see. Let me just check my notes. No, I suppose that was it. Oh, one more thing, and this truly vexes other people. We do not take oaths because we believe them to be superstitious. We will not swear them in court, and we will not swear our loyalty to the king. You love that. We also do not curtsy, we do not bow, we do not tip our hats. So we are not being rude, we simply do not recognize these shows of deference. Let me see. Moving on. Very well. So, with all of this going on and all of the trouble betwixt the Quakers and the mainstream religions, well, Quakers were being imprisoned and beaten and sometimes even executed, persecuted by the thousands. And my great-grandfather, Andrew, not being a fool, decided that he would strike out, leave Europe and its persecutions, and go look to the New World, where he could be free and worship in peace. Now, when folk talk about the freedoms, the religious freedoms of the New World, what they do not realize is that many people who came to the New World did indeed seek religious freedom for themselves. They did not wish it for everyone, only for themselves. So the Puritans came and they wanted to be Puritan, and they wanted all of you to be Puritan as well. That is not religious freedom. That is not tolerance. What makes the part of the world that my great-grandfather moved to so special, originally he emigrated to New Jersey, where he was in great demand as a carpenter, but eventually the Griscom family came over the river to Pennsylvania and Philadelphia. Philadelphia was a wonderful city for Quakers, founded as it was by the Quaker. Do you know? I was asking her. What was that? Oh, clever child. Yes, it was started by William Penn. You see, Charles II had given him an enormous tract of land and named it Pennsylvania, which means Penn's Woods. Much to the displeasure of William Penn, because Quakers are not supposed to have things named for them. No, it is not done. But the king thought he was doing William Penn a great honor, and the clerk wrote in Pennsylvania on the deed, so Pennsylvania it remained. At any rate, William Penn regarded Philadelphia as his holy experiment because he believed strongly in freedom of conscience. And what this means is that men and women are free to worship any way they choose or not to worship at all. Let me say that again for emphasis. They are free to worship in any way they choose or not to go to church at all. And this simply was not being done anywhere else in the world. And folks were believing that it would simply not work. They thought it was foolish that Catholics cannot possibly live peacefully next to Protestants, cannot possibly exist peacefully along Episcopalians. God, no. And they simply cannot live easily next to the Jews or the Muslims. This cannot be done. But so far, it has been working. So it is greatly successful. And, hello. And we are quite pleased with its success, but this is something that made Philadelphia very different from any other place in the world at this time. Now let me see my great-grandfather. Oh, let's go back. He was in New Jersey, then he married, he had a son, Tobias. Tobias married, he had a son named Samuel. Samuel married a good Quaker girl named Rebecca James, and this was my mother. Are you still with me? Excellent, good. Does anyone asleep? Just give them a nudge. So, yes. Around the time I was born, there were already 5 other girls in the Griscom family. There was Deborah, Susanna, Sarah, Rebecca, and Mary. And then Elizabeth. Sadly, 2 other children had died before I'd come along, which made me the 8th child in the family. I was born 1752, January 1st. My mother told me it was so cold. It was the coldest winter anyone could remember, so cold that the animals froze in the fields where they stood. That is a true story. One other thing that is interesting about the day that I was born is that January 1st, 1752, was the first day that we switched over from the Julian calendar into the Gregorian one. So, that means March had previously been the start of the new year, but with the new calendar, this meant that I was born on the first day of the first month of the first year of the new calendar. Some people would take that as a sign, but I am a Quaker and we do not believe in such superstitions. Now let me see. Not there yet. Back here. Yes. When I was 2 years old, my father moved us over across the river. The family was growing. There would be 17 children in all, which is large even for the time. Sadly, only 9 of us would grow to adulthood. But we came across the river to Philadelphia, and I just want to give you one more example of William Penn's wonderful tolerance. He presided over Pennsylvania's only witch trial, the one and only witch trial in Pennsylvania. And I believe it was an old woman named Margaret Matson. And she was found guilty of having the reputation of a witch, but not guilty of the actual practice of witchcraft. She was sent home to her husband, and William Penn famously said at the time, in Pennsylvania, it is not against the law to ride a broomstick. Now, can you imagine a Puritan saying such a thing? No, indeed not. So that is just one example of how special Philadelphia was at the time. And of course, being raised Quaker, well, as a child, there was no dancing, there was no making of music. We were not permitted to read fiction, nor were we to go to the theater, but we did not feel ourselves to be in the least way deprived. We went coasting and sledding in the winter times. We had sailing parties and picnics. We used to sit in my sister's bonnet and try to put it on the cat. Very merry times indeed. I would say that my childhood was usual for a girl in the 1750s, but what did make it unusual in other respects was that Quakers believed in educating their women as well as their men. Horrors! Surely no good can come of this. This was not being done. Even though my mother was raised Quaker, she had never been to school and she could not even write her name. She must sign all her documents with an X for her mark. So I was very pleased, although not always at the time, to go to Rebecca Jones's school 6 days a week and have my learning. In the morning we would do academics, but in the afternoon we had sewing lessons, which I particularly enjoyed. My formal schooling was over by age 12, and I went back to my home to help my mother with all those babies. Now, I was about 15, I wish to say. This would have been mid-1760s, when I chanced to go and visit my sister, who was an apprentice to John Webster, the upholsterer. He was a Quaker in good standing, and so successful was his business that he hired several young women to be seamstresses for him. He was in luck. It was a fine time to be an upholsterer in Philadelphia. 100 years ago, when my great-grandfather had come, everything was so primitive and rough. But now, the citizens of Philadelphia were demanding comforts and furniture and luxuries just like they'd had in London. So it was a wonderful time to be an upholsterer. I should tell you also that upholsterers in my time are rather more like interior decorators today. We made mattress covers and bolster pillows. We hung wallpaper and made Venetian blinds. We produced tassels. We covered furniture, and on and on and on. So, I went to visit my sister, and one of the girls was having trouble with a bit of needlework. She could not manage it. And while I was speaking with my sister, I took the piece from her hands and quickly completed it. It was not a hardship for me. Now, I meant it only as a kindness. I did not mean to put myself forward in any way, I assure you. But at that moment, John Webster came into the shop and saw what I was doing, and I blush to say it, was deeply impressed with my work. In particular, he was impressed because I was much younger than the other girls, but my stitching was faster and neater than theirs. So he went straight to my mother and asked if I could be an apprentice in his shop, and my mother said, no. I cannot spare her, I need her at home. Mother! Oh! I was sure I was doomed to stay at home with babies forever, but then John Webster made my mother, what is the phrase, an offer she could not refuse. He offered to pay her the wages of a kitchen servant, £12 a year, if I would come and apprentice with him. So we should have £12 a year, and I would be learning a trade, and there was no way my mother could forbid me that. So she did not, and I became an apprentice at John Webster's shop. It was lovely to be away from all those babies at my home. And at first, being an apprentice is not terribly exciting. You are given all the lowest duties. You fetch, you carry, you do hems. It is not terribly exciting, but they began to trust me with more and more needlework. And I recollect, well, what I recall the most was coming into the shop, and to me it seemed to be a cave of wonders. If you could have seen the bolts of silk and brocade on the shelves. As a Quaker, I could not wear these colors, but I glutted my eyes on them. And the feel of them, cool, watery silks from England. I reveled in the way they flowed through my fingers. And you will think me fanciful, but I felt as if each fabric had a personality, as though the damasks were ponderous and weighty, like magistrates. But the linen was stiff and upright, like lawyers and clerks. And then the cotton checks were merry and careful, not like sailors. Perhaps you have to be a fabric person to understand these things. But I did so delight in these fabrics, and I would run my hands over them. And it seemed to me when we got a new bouquet of silk from England that my fingers would just itch to touch it. So I enjoyed that very much indeed. And we just covered that. science. At about this time, in a young woman's story, there usually comes a boy. And determined as I was to prove myself in Master Webster's shop, I would have been blind not to notice the tall, dark-eyed apprentice working next to me. I thought he looked a treat in his red check jacket and leather apron. His name was John Ross. He was the son of Aeneas Ross, the minister, and he'd grown up in Newcastle, Delaware, wherever that is. But he'd grown up poor, and he was determined to raise himself. He wanted to open his own shop. He had his own set of tools. For 5 years, we worked alongside each other, and he teased me, putting things on high shelves that he knew I could not reach. Also, he teased me about my plain and quiet Quaker clothing, saying my clothes were the only quiet thing about me. When we were both 1 and 20 years of age, he told me that he would soon be opening his shop. And then, such a shop would require more than one worker. Of course, it would behoove him if the worker was already trained as an upholsterer, and if they could keep all the wages in-house. You see where this is going. And he said, even though I was as talkative and chatty as a monkey, and I could not dance, he would do me the great honor of becoming my husband. This was his romantic proposal to me. Of course, by this time I was throwing things at him. But we were keen to wed. Even as the colony's relationship with Great Britain deteriorated, I sat in the shop and I stitched and I thought about our own little shop and a house above it perhaps, and little black-eyed children running about full of their father's mischief. I saw it all so clearly as I stitched and snipped. There were problems. The biggest one was that John was not a Quaker. He was an Anglican. Now, this did not matter very much to us at all. We knew that we were compatible, but it was a matter of grave concern for the Quaker Church and also for my parents, and they urged me to give up the match. But I could not do this. It was far too late. John had my heart. I could not simply put it down and pick up another match as though it were a pair of shoes. Furthermore, I knew the Quaker Church would continue on despite my marriage and thrive, and likewise would my parents continue to prosper. But my life would be wretched without John. And I would not live that way. Was it really my fate to let him go, to watch him walk by the streets of Philadelphia and see him age and marry another when I knew he was supposed to be mine? No! No! I would not do this! I would not make this choice! And so I took the choice that many star-crossed lovers have taken over the years. I eloped. They did not put that in your history books, did they? I had help from my sister Mary and her husband. We had to be rowed across the river to New Jersey. Everything is legal in New Jersey. I remember the day. 'Twas unseasonably warm, 76 degrees at noon, and of course we were working all day, and we could not leave before the cover of night, for fear that we would be seen and stopped. We could not take the ferry over, because again we might be seen, so we rowed in the dark across the Delaware River to New Jersey, and we got on shore and hid the skiff, and then the party of us, the wedding party, walked down the road to Hug's Tavern. where we were married for a justice of the peace. John and I had our shop for 2 years before we moved it again to a little house on Arch Street. Business was slow, worryingly slow. There were too many upholsterers, you see, in Philadelphia at the time. But we took in the business that we could, and we were happy together, and every Sunday did we go down to Christ Church to worship there. And John said the first time I came to church there, he laughed at me saying my eyes were saucers. Well, how could I help it? At Christ Church, the women swarmed into their pews, wearing dresses of silk and brocade and satin, and the men were wearing breeches of velvet and powdered wigs. It seemed to me that the congregation was drowning in a sea of ruffles and lace. And the service itself, what a cacophony! There is organ music, there is singing. Well, this preacher never stopped preaching. On and on and on. How am I to commune with my own inner light if no one ever stopped speaking? Then we were standing, we were kneeling, we were sitting, we were kneeling, we were standing, we were sitting. What is the point of this? It was not what I was used to at all. And after the service, I said to John, who is that man over there, the one that is most exceeding tall? For truly he stood head and shoulders above everyone else in the congregation. He said, oh, that is a man named Washington. I said, oh, that is nice. So on we went, and things with England were getting worse and worse, always troublesome. The First Continental Congress met at Carpenter's Hall, only a short walk from my doorstep. Delegates from 12 colonies present. One of the delegates was John's own uncle, George Ross. John had always supported the Patriot side, and when the Continental Congress called for men, he joined the local Citizens Guard. Now, all around the city, patriots were storing and hiding arms and ammunition in the event of a war, and it was John's job to go and keep a guard on these things. In our shop, with no English fabric coming in, I did what I could. I mended clothing, bed curtains, draperies, bed covers, anything I could to keep body and soul together. Privately, I fretted. We had been married for some time, and there were still no signs of a child. Could there be something wrong with me? I could not bear it if I failed John in this way. Perhaps it was simply not to be. Perhaps I was never meant to be a mother. All that winter, I fretted about it when John was at guard duty. Spring came with shocking news. Down at the city tavern, a rider from Boston, he said British troops clashed with local farmers at a place called Lexington in Concord. Now there was no going back. Certain sure we would have a war. The Second Continental Congress was called, and they met at the Pennsylvania State House. John Hancock was named president of the Congress, and George Washington became commander-in-chief. Do you know the tall man from church? Yes, he became chief of the Continental Army. One night, in the winter of '76, I was sleeping in my bed and John was on guard duty when I heard the most fearful thumping at the door. God, are we being invaded? Is there a fire? I threw on my robe and I rushed down the stairs and I opened the door and, oh God, it's John. He's burned. There was an explosion. The warehouse he was guarding was full of gunpowder. There was a spark. He did not live. I did what I could for him. But in the end, I could not even ease his pain. took him a while. It took him a while to die. It is hard to forgive that. If he must die, do it quickly and be done. Do not let him suffer so. We buried him at Christ Church. There is no headstone. Only a line in the Christ Church burial book that reads, January 21st, 1776, John Ross, upholsterer. We had been married for 2 years. I was 24 years old and a widow. I did not even have his child to comfort me. Decisions. There were decisions to be made. I could close the shop. I could move back in with my parents. But they would want me to join the Quaker Church again, and I could not see my way to doing that. 3 times. 3 times after I married John, and they came to me and asked me to repent my marriage and return to the church. But even now, I did not regret my choice. And I would not go back to them. John Webster, I knew, would take me on again at his shop. I could work for him. But I would lose my shop. It was the last thing I had from John. No. I would keep it open. I would keep it open in tribute to my John. It was the one thing that I could do for him. You will forgive my emotion. I shall collect myself presently. Well, spring came. I've soon to learn that wars slow down in wintertime. But in the spring they come again. It is easier to fight, you see, in the springtime. General Washington had made the British abandon Boston, but we were not faring so well in Canada. It was feared the British would take New York next. So the Continental Congress brought General Washington to Philadelphia to plan. One of the things that General Washington needed to procure was a new flag to unite the 13 colonies. We had been using all sorts of flags up to then, and the one they were using now was causing great confusion on the battlefield because it had the Union Jack up in the corner. Now, we meant for the British to see that and realize that we were still hoping for justice from the crown. But it did not come across that way. They thought we were trying to surrender. So we needed a new flag. One day, I was in my shop, and I heard a knock. Curious. I opened the door, and there was the enormously tall man from church. And he was there with my uncle by marriage, George Ross, and another man that they introduced as Robert Livingston. Apparently he's quite wealthy. So they said they needed a flag to represent the new nation, and they heard that I could make such a thing and handed me a paper. I opened it. It was a sketch of a flag. Could I make one? Why, yes, I think I can. It does not look as complicated as bed curtains. And the more I looked at it, the more I thought, square is wrong for this shape. Should be rectangular. It will fly better in the wind. And why 6 points on the stars? Nay, I like it not. I think the stars should have 5 points on them. And Washington cleared his throat and explained to me that he needed this flag as quickly as possible, and that 6-pointed stars would be faster and easier to make. I said, no, allow me. And so, I told him that I could make a enough with one snip of my shears. So I took a piece of paper, folded it thus, and so, thus, and so. That's not right. Well, I have been dead a long time. Concentrate, Betsy, concentrate. Aha! Star! Oh, wait, no. You may applaud. You may use that in your stitching. And thus it was that we came to have 5 pointed stars on the flag once I had proved to His Excellency that I could make them so terribly quickly. The flag was approved by Congress, and I got to work quickly. I went out that very day for materials and goods and started stitching and sewing and cutting all the way. Oh, goodness, we just did that. Yes. I have long believed that it was my Uncle George Ross that set the General to my doorstep, knowing, as he was, that I would be in need of work. Also, it made sense because I was known to be a patriot, and in a city that was filled with Tories, one does not want to go to a Tory upholsterer and bid them make a flag for the rebel cause. No, it was a specific set of qualifications, and of course I had those. Now, while I was shopping and stitching, the Second Continental Congress was closeted away up in the State House. Nobody knew what they were doing. Rumor had it they were crafting a document majestic enough to defy King George III. I was glad my task was only sewing flags. Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, Robert Livingston, all were in attendance. Finally, July 8th, their masterpiece, written mainly by Thomas Jefferson, was read aloud. They read the great bronze bell in the State House, the same tower that my father had helped to construct some 20 years before. All of us hurried to the State House to hear this most impressive document. Apprentices, tradesmen, seamstresses, mothers and their babes, shopkeepers, merchants, clerks. We rushed. All of us, thousands of citizens, came to listen to this notorious paper that proclaimed all men to be created equal. However, it is one thing to defy Great Britain. It is quite another thing to defeat them. And pretty words are not the same as decisive actions. In the fall, we heard that Long Island and New York City had fallen to the British, and Washington and his troops were making a desperate flight across New Jersey to safety. In Philadelphia, people were frantic. Would we be occupied by the British? No, not yet, not this time. We were safe for now. In the meantime, I could not help but notice a young man who was visiting my shop with increasing frequency. He was a sailor I knew from his long ponytail, and as I know that sailors are generally not interested in upholstery, the purpose of his visits became clear. I told him I had no heart for his courtship. I could hear his suit, but I could not like it. His name was Joseph Ashburn. He was patient with me. Sailors who must wait for the winds to blow and fill their sails know how to be patient. He knew I was grieving, but he never reproached me. All that year, all that winter, he told me stories of his journeys. Times he'd gone to the Caribbean, where the water was as warm as a bath and a beautiful shade of crystal blue. He told me the air was full of spices. I began to enjoy his visits, then to depend on them. But no, I could not wed him. It is not possible. But finally, that sly fox found the one question that could make me seriously consider his suit. He took my hands in his and he said, "Did I not still long for children?" Yes. He pressed that button gently, but he pressed it all the same. I do not think any other question could have made me consider him, but yes, I still wished for a family of my own. And so, we were wed in June in the city of Wakeko. 'Tis an Indian name that means peaceful place, and how we hoped that name would prove prophetic. This time I took my vows in the Gloria Dei Church, Lutheran Church. 'Twas the 15th of June, 1777. Now, lest you look down upon my behavior as frivolous or light, I shall remind you that remarriage in my day was not uncommon. Men died from smallpox, yellow fever, warming throat, bloody thrush, drinking. Women died at childbirth. Remarriages were very common. And also that marriage for love is a very modern concept. Not everyone expected to be in love when they wed in my time. It was more of a partnership, a beneficial partnership that we hoped would provide mutual comfort and survival. And if one was fortunate, perhaps the affections for one another would develop in time. Joseph and I were fortunate. By the time he got back to his ship, the Swallow, he took my true affections with him. When people ask me about my life, the question they ask the most after, "Did you really make the flag?" The question they ask the most is, what was it like to live in an occupied city with the British? Well, it was awful. It was absolutely awful. Joseph could not stay with me. He was a legal privateer, but they would have loved to have gotten their hands on him in his ship. He had to save the Swallow, and so he left. Patriots fled the city, went to the countryside, and who could blame them? I could have joined them, but I did not. I would have had to leave my shop, and I had no income. I thought perhaps this was foolish, but I thought perhaps an occupied shop will be less tempting to loot than one that is empty. I might have paid a terrible price for this, but in wartime you cannot know the outcome. You must make your choices and just pray God you have the strength to suffer the consequences. And so I stayed. I was not trying to be brave. I did not feel brave or defiant, especially not when I heard the British and the dreadful Hessian soldiers come marching down 2nd Street. I ran downstairs to the kitchen and flung my apron over my head and huddled in a corner till I could not hear God Save the King playing anymore. The winter was terrifically hard, though nothing compared to what our soldiers suffered at Valley Forge. No supplies could get into the city. The prices of everything from beef to pins soared. A pound of butter, 13 cents 2 years ago, was now $1. One woman noted in her journal that Philadelphians would pay 15 shillings for a rat if they could get their hands on one. At least it was not only the patriots who suffered. The loyalist soldiers suffered along with them. The winter was so cold, they were breaking up church pews, fences, doors, anything, shutters, anything they could burn to stay warm. I was fortunate. While I had occasional interactions with the British soldiers, it could not be helped. None molested me or my shop. Indeed, I seemed to amuse them. They called me the Little Rebel. What I wanted, more than anything else, was for the British to leave and Joseph to return home. The entire city rejoiced when General Howe, well, the Patriots rejoiced, not so much the Tories, but General Howe's company took leave in June of 1778 and left the city a stinking wreck, I might add. I see that our time is, oh dear, we are running quite short on time. I shall try to, how do you say it, sum up. But I was making musket bullets and cartridges for the Continental Army in the winter of '79 when I realized, at long last, I was going to be a mother. Thank you. Oscilla was born in September. Oscilla, you may think, is a strange name, but we had too many Elizabeths already in my family, and too many Susans and Deborahs and Marys. It is Latin for little bird. And how she did chirp. She had beautiful blue-gray eyes, just perfect for a sea captain's daughter. We could not keep her. 9 months, no, nearly a year. She died. Fever. We buried her in a little coffin of chestnut. We did not have the money for mahogany, the silver nameplate. This is all I will say about it. I think there is no grief as sharp as a mother's. But even though I did not wish to continue living, my heart continued stubbornly beating anyway. Perhaps it was good that the choice was taken out of my hands, for I was already expecting another baby. And that gave me reason to continue on. Joseph set out to sea again. And he was chasing British ships down all over Europe. It was legal. He was a privateer, not a pirate. Though they do exactly the same job. Joseph was on the Lion this time. The Swallow had served many years and was no longer shipworthy. And our second little girl was born, Eliza. Dark-eyed like her mother, dark-eyed like her grandfather. The true joy to us. The war ended, finally, October of 1781 with Cornwallis's surrender at Yorktown. We rejoiced and began rebuilding the city. The city came back to life again. Soldiers returned home, sweethearts were reunited, mothers embraced their sons, shops reopened. But where was Joseph? Eliza began to crawl, and then to pull up on things, as if she would try to walk before falling back down on her padded bottom again. But Joseph did not come. Eliza began teething. She grizzled so, and I walked up and down our shop, soothing her and holding the fractious baby while the gums were split. And Joseph did not come. Finally, in August, there was a knock at the door. I flew to the door. I opened it. Oh, 'tis John Claypool. We have known each other since we were children. I know he was wounded grievously in the fighting, but I was very pleased to see that he had survived the war. Very pleased indeed. He was thin, terribly thin, pale, but alive. I ushered him in, and he began to speak to me. He had been at sea. He had been at sea and had been captured by the British and taken to Old Mill Prison in Europe, in Plymouth. And while he was there, conditions were dreadful. The men were starving. Disease ran rampant. They were selling their clothes, trying to buy bread. And while he was there, he saw a familiar face. He saw Joseph. Joseph was terribly ill. But he kept his wits until the end. And he told John Claypool that should he survive the war, he was to go back to Philadelphia and look in on his wife and child and take care of them for him. And so he died in that stinking pit. He would not live to see his daughter. And I was widowed. Again. Well, I lived to be 84. And I am only in my 30s now. So there is no way I can talk about the next 50 years in a timely fashion. So I shall begin to gloss over some things. 14 months after the knock on my door, and perhaps some of you have seen this coming, John Claypool and I wed. We were the survivors. And we would continue to survive together. I had 5 more children, all little girls. Poor John. There was Eliza, Clarissa Sidney, Susan, Rachel, Jane, and Harriet. Harriet died as a baby, but my other children are thriving and well and went on to have children and grandchildren of their own. John, at my insistence, joined me in the upholstery shop. I would not have a seafaring husband again. And together, we ran the shop for many, many years. We were married for another 35 years until his death. I did not retire until the age of 75. I did not wish to. And my children, as I said, grew and married and had children of their own. And for the rest of my days, I got to cuddle them and coddle them and spoil them and bore them with stories of how their grandmother had lived through the Revolution and the time that she had made one very special flag. Thank you so much for your kind attention today. such a wonderful question. This woman here asked, did I continue to practice being a Quaker? And the answers are yes and no. Many Quakers were cast out, many Quakers were cast out of meeting because they were fighting in the Revolution, and of course that goes strictly against our pacifist tenets. So I was one of the founding members of the Free Quaker Meeting Church in Philadelphia. Thank you. It was our belief that no one should be expelled for acting on their conscience, and so you could not be read out of the Free Quaker Meeting. I was one of the very first members, and I was one of the very last members who helped close its doors. There were only 2 of us left at the end. You may go and see the Free Quaker Meeting House. Excellent question, madam. Thank you. It is still standing today, and perhaps you will find my dear friend Timothy Matlack there. Tell him Betsy sent you. Yes, anything else, madam?
Did you make just one flag?
Oh!
Did you make one flag?
No, of course not. I made many, 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 many flags. There are actually still receipts you can find that say that I made receipts for the Pennsylvania Navy. And this is so. I made as many flags as possible. I needed the money. Anything else? Now is your chance. Madam.
What did you charge for?
Excellent question. Do you carry the 3?
What is one?
No, I'm doing mental arithmetic. Do you know, I do not recall. I remember that I was very pleased with what Congress paid me. But I was not ecstatic. But I was pleased, so I earned a fair wage. Any other queries? Sir?
The first flag you made still exists?
I could not say. It is as I say, flags were not revered or treasured. They were used. It was like saving a piece of rope, or no one thought to save it. So they might perhaps be about, but I could not say, and you must shave that mustache. It flatters you, it does, but it reminds me of the Hessians. I shall become anxious.
I was not from Germany, I was from Russia, so I'm not Hessian.
If you say so. I know a Hessian when I see it. Well, that reminds me of a story that my third husband, John Claypool, liked to tell. He had a captured Hessian soldier, and he said, for heaven's sakes, man, why would you want to go against a war with a people you did not even know, who were no threat to you? And the man said back to him, Hessian no shoot colonists, Hessians shoot low. It's a very good answer if you were a prisoner. Any other queries, or shall I hand it back over to John?
I want to know about red, white, and blue.
What would you like to know about them, madam?
Why did you choose that?
Oh, but I did not. I would not presume to choose the colors. No, those were the colors presented to me in the sketch.
Oh,
I believe, well, they were the colors of Washington's personal crest. So mayhap that is how they came to be. And you remember, of course, we had the one flag with the Union Jack at the corner, and oh, it is interesting. My second husband, Joseph Ashburn, used to tell me about how they used flags on ships. If you ever come across a ship in your travels and it is flying a yellow flag, stay away. It is a ship of sickness. Something is aboard, like cholera, something fair deadly. So never board a ship with an all-yellow sail. Do you to remember that? If that is all, you may all adjourn to the tavern.
now. She's going to channel her inner self.
Hello, I'm Betsy Ross.
Feel honors and talk to you and handle any questions you might have about what it's like to play historical figures.
I also have some, I was practicing in my hotel room last night. So I have many practice stars if you would like to come up and get one for your grandchildren. They are free of charge. But you can ask me anything you like. Madam, yes. I have, and it's absolutely terrifying. I have met some of the descendants. They come to the Betsy Ross house, and you just hope, by God, you don't say anything stupid. Yes, in the
Would
back.
Betsy have ever sewn a flag with more than 13 stars?
Excellent question. Yes. By the time she was older, they were kept adding and adding and adding and adding stars. So, yes, she would have. Good question. She's happy she didn't have to sew 50. Oh, I should. All right, here's my shameless plug. Are you ready? I'm actually the associate producer for a company called American Historical Theater. And one of the other characters that I portray regularly is Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis. Available for keynote speaking, weddings, bat mitzvahs. But if you go onto the Facebook, as the kids call it, or online, you can go to American Historical Theater and see a variety of our characters. We got your Thomas Jeffersons, we got your John Adams, we got your Abigail Adams, we got everybody. I also play the pirate Anne Bonny in a sword fighting pirate show for children, which is an awful lot of fun. We got to talk about scurvy and cat o' nine tails and all sorts of good things like that, all about pirate life. So yeah, please do look us up. We'd love to come out and do a presentation for you. And I will have Eliza Hamilton just as soon as I write that sucker. I called my boss and I said, guess what? Somebody booked me to do a Betsy Ross show, and now I'll have an hour-long program to go, and I can go out and book that. And she said, yeah, do you have an Eliza Hamilton? So now it's Eliza Hamilton. Anybody here want to grow up to be an actor? Good, there's no money in it.
Where did you hear that first?
All right, well, thank you all so much. Have a lovely afternoon.
Thank you for coming. And a reminder that our final third lecture in the series is 4 weeks from today. And we're here now and see covered bridges in the area. So hope to see you then. Ready to see you Sunday. Thank you.